Say hi, kids!
Say welcome to chapter 3, where Jiggy Nye is going to threaten Felicity. Okay?
All right, let's get started. Chapter 3, Jiggy Nye's Threat. September begins the season of thunderstorms in Virginia. For the next 3 days, the sky was as gray as pewter. Rain fell in sheets, and the wind roared around the corners of the house. Felicity felt as trapped as Penny was in Mr. Nye's pasture. "May I go out of doors, Mother?" she asked. "In this storm," her mother said. "Don't be a goose. The streets are all mud, and you'll be soaked to the skin in this rain. You'll just have to wait till it stops." Felicity sighed. "Lissy, my love," said her mother. Her gentle voice sounded tired. "Look at this apron you sewed. I've had to rip out the hem on it again. It's supposed to be 20 stitches to the inch, Lissy. And in a line, yours fly all over. Your sister Nan sews more carefully, and she is but 6 years old." "I'm sorry, Mother. Indeed I am," said Felicity. "My hands just won't go so slow." Mrs. Merriman patted Felicity's hands and handed her the apron. "You will have to teach your hands to slow down, my girl," she said. Felicity held up the apron and shook her head sadly. "All these miles and miles of stitches. They are never finished," she said. "Slow and steady, my child," said her mother. "They'll be done faster if you do them right, so that you don't have to sew every seam twice. Remember, haste makes waste." "Haste makes waste," Felicity repeated. She and her mother had to smile at each other, for Felicity was told that haste makes waste at least once every day of her life. She settled down to her stitching and tried very hard to be careful for a little while. At last the sun broke through the clouds and Felicity was allowed to go outside. "Take these preserves to Mrs. Dear," said her mother. "Nan and William will go with you. They've been cooped up too." Felicity hid her disappointment. She wanted to go see Penny by herself. She didn't want Nan and William dragging along. They were so slow, and she was so eager to see Penny. But she had no choice. William toddled along on his fat little legs, dragging a stick through the mud. He stopped to pick up stones and drop them in puddles. He seemed to be trying to get as much mud on his shoes as he could. Nan walked in little ladylike steps, picking her way carefully around the puddles. Felicity was forever having to turn around and wait for careful Nan and Muddy William. "Ooh, Lissy," said Nan. "Look at the fine hat in the milliner's window. It has a whole bouquet of flowers on it. Let's go in and look at it." "No, come along, Nan," said Felicity. "I don't want to waste time with that foolishness." Nan was miffed for a while, but she cheered up and put on her sweetest face when they reached Miss Dear's house. Mrs. Dear gave Nan and William each a cake. She fussed over them until Felicity thought she'd burst with impatience. Then, when they were at last on their way to the tannery, Nan announced, "I want to go home. I won't go any farther." "Nan," Felicity said sternly, "we're going to the tannery. Come along." "No," said Nan, "the tannery smells terrible. I won't go." She stuck out her lip. "I won't too," said William. Felicity had an idea. "Nan," she said slowly, "there are lots of flowers out by the tannery. You can pick them and put them in your hat so it will look just like the one in the milliner's window. Won't that be fine?" "Well, perhaps," said Nan, "but I won't speak to that dirty old Mr. Nye. He's bad." "Bad," repeated William. He swung his sticks as if they were swords. Felicity led them along Mr. Nye's house to the pasture, and there was Penny. She was thinner, and her coat was even more matted and dirty. There was a red cut on one leg, as if she had hurt it trying to jump over the fence. Mr. Nye had tied Penny to a stake. The poor horse was straining at the rope, pawing at the ground, and jerking and tossing her head. "Horse," said William. "Yes," said Felicity. "Her name is Penny because she's the color of a penny and because she's so independent." "What does independent mean?" asked Nan. "It means she has a free spirit," said Felicity. "Penny wants to run." Felicity climbed up on the pasture fence. "Don't go near her," warned Nan. "She won't hurt me. She will never hurt me," said Felicity. She called to Penny softly, slowly. "Penny, Penny, love, look here. Look what I've brought you." Felicity tossed a loose lump of sugar close to Penny's nose. "So much sugar, Lissy," said Nan. "Where did you get it?" "Hush," said Felicity. She didn't take her eyes off Penny. "And don't tell about it when we get home, or—" "So!" Mr. Nye's voice croaked in her ear. Felicity's heart stopped. Mr. Nye grabbed her by her shoulders and pulled her down off the fence. Nan knelt next to William and held him tight. "You're that sly red-headed chit, ain't ye?" said Mr. Nye. "Didn't I tell ye to stay away from my horse?" Felicity yanked herself out of his grasp. "I am not hurting her," she said. "This horse is none of your business, hear me?" growled Mr. Nye. "She's a vicious animal. She knocked the fence down trying to jump out of the pasture. I had to tie her up. I don't want you spooking her. Stay away." Felicity was frightened, but she was angry. "You are the one who scares the poor horse," she said to Mr. Nye. "You have no right to treat her so badly." Mr. Nye grabbed Felicity again, but just then Penny whinnied wildly. "Quiet, you nag!" Mr. Nye shouted at Penny. He picked up a big stick and climbed into the pasture. As he came near, Penny reared. With a mighty pull, she broke the rope that tied her. Mr. Nye lost his balance and fell back into the dirt. He shook his fist at Penny as she ran away to the far end of the pasture. "You worthless nag!" Mr. Nye yelled after Penny. His face was spattered with mud. "I'd give ye to anyone who can ride ye. Anyone can have ye. Hear me?" Mr. Nye stomped toward his house. Suddenly he turned toward Felicity and snarled. "And you, get yourself and those brats out of here. I'll skin ye alive if I see ye here again." Then he stormed off. Nan was crying. "Let's go, please, let's go," she begged. She pulled on Felicity's petticoats and dragged her away. Felicity looked back to see Penny galloping around the pasture. At least Penny was not tied to the stake anymore. She was fenced in, but she could run and move. "Good for you, Penny," thought Felicity. "Don't you let Mr. Nye scare you. I won't let him scare me." At supper time, it was William who gave it away. "Big horse," he said. "Bad man." He waved his spoon wildly. "Shh," hissed Nan. "What's all this?" asked Mother. "You've not been out to see that horse of Jiggy Nye's, have you?" "Felicity made us go," said Nan. "And the horse made Mr. Nye fall down in the mud. Then Mr. Nye called the horse a nag, and he said anyone could take it if they could ride it, and he said he would skin us alive if we ever came back." "Hush, my child," scolded Mrs. Merriman. "It's not proper to repeat such talk." She looked at Felicity, and her face was serious. "Jiggy Nye told you not to come back, and you won't, ever. His tannery is not a place for children." "He was going to strike the horse with a big stick," added Nan. "The man's a villain of the worst sort," muttered Mr. Merriman. "A horse beater." Ben spoke up. "He'll kill the horse, sir," he said. "Mark me, he will." "Oh, Father," cried Felicity, "we can't let Mr. Nye hurt Penny. We've got to help her. We've got to get her away from Mr. Nye. Can't we buy her?" "Gracious, no!" exclaimed her mother. "We've old Bess for your father to ride and Blossom to draw the cart." "Bess is so slow, it's faster if you walk yourself," said Felicity. "Young lady," said Mrs. Merriman, "it would not harm you to go more slowly in all things. Stitches and speeches and thinking, too." Mr. Merriman spoke gently. "We've no need for a troublesome horse like that, my child. It would be useless to us, too. No one wants a horse that cannot be ridden. Besides, Marcus has enough to do with old Bess and Blossom. He does not have time to care for another horse." "But I would take care of her," said Felicity eagerly. "I would tame her and teach her. I would do everything." Ben looked up. Mrs. Merriman sighed. "Lissy," she said, "my impatient, headstrong Lissy, you have not the patience to sew a seam properly. You leave your writing practice half done. You lead your sister and brother to dangerous places and never stop to think. A willful girl and a willful horse is more than one family can handle. You must put that horse out of your head. Do you hear me?" "Yes, ma'am," Felicity answered, for it was true. She did hear what her mother said, but she did not put the horse out of her head or her heart.